Hello, my friends. Welcome back to the channel. You'll have to excuse me looking super tired, but I was up incredibly late having the conversation that you're about to watch. So, the following is an amazing conversation with probably my biggest hero in this entire field, Grant Cameron. I'm not going to waste your time by rattling off a list of his accomplishments, nor could I, frankly. But this is the 50th anniversary of his first sighting, which has sparked off the most incredible career. Nobody in history has leaked more secret military documents than him. And yet, when you speak to him now, it's the thing that he's least interested in. He's fully invested in the study of consciousness and um, post materialist view of the world, the telepathy tapes. And he certainly doesn't pull his punches. So this is a guy who, in the Citizen congressional hearing of 2013, opened his talk by saying directly to Congress, "You guys don't have any power. Private aerospace has all of the power and all of the secrets. And if you want to do anything, you need to get it back." And this is 12 years ago, and we're still talking about it now. So, if you want a very unfiltered view of whether Llewellyn Elizondo is a government plant, what the UFO phenomena is all about and what it's trying to achieve, how the government keeps it secret, why the government keeps it secret, the true nature of reality, and tons more. Get yourself a cup of tea, and I hope you enjoy this as much as I did. I'll see you soon.
Go ahead.
Great. Well, Grant Cameron, and a real honor. Thank you so much for being here. So, really, where to start? I mean, you started in 1975 with Charlie Red Star, and now we're talking about everything being an activity within consciousness. So, do you mind do you
Yeah.
mind giving us a little run through of where you sort of went from that curve of solid spaceships to where we are now?
Yeah. Well, that's where I sort of try to get across to the young people because there was never many young people in the business. There's always old people that were. So I'm glad guys like you have come along. And I always try to point out the fact that the world that I started in is not the world that it is now. I mean, some of the stuff that I've seen now, like the light language and people flying ships and alien writing and all that stuff, it's a completely different world. People don't understand how much the world has changed and how much the UFO phenomena actually changes. What people don't really realize, I don't think, is that it's morphing. So just writing up a piece of a book about the 1890 flap, where there was stuff there and they were flying from Mars and, on wooden ships and stuff like that. And that's what I try to point out. So when it started for me, it was very simple. It was a flap that was occurring about 30 miles from the city where I lived in. And I didn't really have any interest in UFOs. I had sort of interest in paranormal phenomena, but not UFOs. And I just went out there because people were kept saying they were seeing this thing, and then a local TV crew actually caught this thing jumping off the ground, which is like exactly the opposite of the Nimitz. The Nimitz drops from 80,000 feet down to sea level. This goes from ground level to 5,000 feet in the air in 1/8 of a second, and it's caught on film from a film crew from TV. And so that's when that happened. I said, "Well, come on, let's go see what they're looking at." And I've always described it as buying the lottery ticket. There's a chance you can win, but you're not going to win. I mean, there's no way you're going to win. Everybody else will see it. You're not going to see anything. We went out there, we drove around for an hour. Um, we didn't know what people were looking at. And my friend said, "Okay, we'll drive into the town one more time. If nothing happens, let's go home." I said, "Great. There's been a total waste of time." I knew we wouldn't see anything. We turned the car to go back in. And just as we turned the car to go back in the town the last time, the thing appeared from the left to the right. And nobody in the car said, "Is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what they're looking at." Everybody's like, "There it is." It's like instantly knew. It was just so weird. And it flew right in front of the car. And years later, I sort of came to the conclusion that it came in that close because it wanted me to never, ever doubt that this phenomenon was real. So I find that a lot of people get sort of sidetracked. They're trying to prove UFOs exist and stuff like that. And when you have an experience like mine, I wrote up a book at that time about this sighting in this town called Carmen, and the 59% of the kids in the high school said they'd seen something. So I wrote up this manuscript, and the publisher should have published. The local publisher said, "Mr. Cameron, You may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And I went, wow. It's like, that's it. No more sightings. Forget this. It's telling people stories about what they see doesn't mean anything unless you actually see it yourself. And all I wanted at that point was to figure out, I wanted to find out the person who knew. I said, somebody's got to know what's going on here. So I started this search, and I had this synchronistic event where a guy, my father was a pilot for the Canadian government. There was a guy in his office had a UFO sighting, and he said, Ernie Epp wants to talk to you. So I went over there, and I just synchronistically, this guy happened to work for the Canadian government UFO program in the 1950s. And so then I started there, and I was looking at what the Canadians had done in the early 1950s. And that led me to Dr. Eric Walker, who was the chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, top military think tank, 14 honorary doctorate degrees, worked for Eisenhower, and stuff like that. Penn State University president for 15 years. And we got a little bit more from him, and he knew exactly what was going on. He talked in rhymes and riddles, which didn't make any sense for 20 years. And that led to the presidents, because he was going to send some of his files to the presidents. And we figured maybe it was the Research and Development Board files. He had been the assistant head of weapons for the U.S. military. And it was there I said, well, the president's got to know what's going on here. And so I said to the Truman Library, I said, so what do you got? What do you got for UFOs? And he said, well, I got about 20 pages. And there were all these 1952, if you recall, there was an overflight of Washington, D.C. And it happened 2 weeks in a row, just Saturday and then the next Saturday. And during that time, there had been a supposed shoot down order by Truman. And all these telegrams are coming into the White House saying, don't shoot them down, Mr. President. Don't shoot the UFOs down. And those were the telegrams. I said, that's all you got? And they said, no, that's all we got. And I went, whoa. And so I went to the Eisenhower Library, which is maybe 2 hours down the road in Kansas. And there I said, what have you got? And he said, 5 pages or 5 documents. I said, 5 documents? How many pages have you got in the library? He said, 28 million pages. And I went, what? There's 5 documents? And so I went, did that. I spun my wheels there for, maybe 25 years with the presidents, figure out which presidents have seen stuff, which ones talk about it, are they briefed, all this kind of stuff that goes around. And it was in 2012 when I stopped the sort of the endless, waiting for disclosure from the government or trying to prove to my friends that UFOs are real. And I had these consciousness download watching Colin Andrews give a lecture in Arizona. And it was at that point I was told three things that were put together. They were not things that were new to me. They were things that I knew about, but they put them all together in one thing. So one was the Canadian government in 1950 had written a top secret memo talking about the fact that flying saucers exist. We were told by the Americans flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. There's a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush who are trying to figure out what's going on. The subject is of tremendous significance to the Americans. And then the next line, which came into my head, said, we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena, which goes back to say this is 1950 memo, which means the Americans knew because they told the Canadians mental phenomena may be involved. So they've known all along. And then the other thing was Ben Rich talking at 1993, telling Jan Harzen, when Jan Harzen asked him how they were propelled, he said, what do you know about ESP? And he said, well, everything in time and space is connected. He said, that's how it worked. And that's exactly what Walker had told us 2 years before. He asked us a question. He said, hey, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And then the guy you really didn't know, he's from Great Britain, the guy who was doing the interview. And he said, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken into the control group. The guys that are running it, he called them a group of elites that were running the show. And so it was that moment I went, oh, it's conscious, but I still didn't really know what consciousness was. As I make the joke in 2012, I couldn't have spelled consciousness. I couldn't have cared less. I mean, I really didn't say consciousness. I knew it was like this ESP thing. There was some sort of connection there. And as it's developed, I had like 2013, I had the first person come to me, a woman by the name of Pam Dupuy, who came to me to say she'd flown the flying saucer. At which point I was going to throw her out of the house. I'd be like, are you crazy? I mean, I've been at 39 years. I'd worked on the phenomena. And suddenly this woman's telling she's flying the flying saucer. And it's like, come on already. Come on. You think I'm stupid? And then when I asked her, like, how do you fly a flying saucer? And she says, oh, you do it with your mind. Then I went, oh. And then all these people started coming to me. 36 people came to me, all telling the same story about the fact that they're on the craft. they touch something on the craft, they become one with the craft is alive, and whatever they think is what the craft does, and they can go instantaneously from any point in space to any point in space, almost like they go across the galaxy in half a second or something like that. So that's what sort of led me, and then I started to realize that this is all going to be almost like maybe spiritual is in the world, but if you have a world. I had a second download in 2016, which sort of said, you think it's this, it's actually this. You think it's this, it's actually this, and gave me these 24 things. And one was, is it random? If it is, then that's one world. But if it's pattern, then it's a whole different world. And it's this whole idea that if there's a pattern behind the universe, if there's fields and morphogenetic fields and things are developing outside of random, that it isn't random, it's something's behind it, then it's all going to be ontological. It's all, we came into the world to do something, we're going to leave the world, and this is all a big play where it's the idea of the mystical teachings that actually apply to UFOs. You got to remember who you actually are. You're not a human being. You're an etheric being that's playing a human being. And that's the message you'll get from experiencers over and over again. This idea, remember who you actually are, and this idea of oneness, that you're all connected to that you're all connected. And so I have spent most of my time now trying to talk to the experiencers, and I keep trying to influence people to say, lights in the sky will teach you something's going on. And you probably, it's probably not us. It's probably something pretty weird. That's all it is. That's why they put lights on UFOs so you can see them. They want you to see them, and they want you to get awe and curiosity and go, what the heck's going on? And start trying to figure out, is the world the way I think it is? But in terms of the ufology, I think we've spent a lot of time making mistakes in terms of trying to prove it to our friends and relatives rather than saying, okay, it's real. Now, what's really going on? So I've always tried to stay on that side. And where I say you've got to go, you got to go to the experiencer. You got to deal with the people who are dealing with the intelligence, because there are people who are claiming they're dealing with the intelligence. And I have this idea that other people have developed as well. This idea that 40% of all experiencers say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe, which means there is a field with the answers to everything. And some people can get in the field, some people can't. So to make a long story short, my discovery for who knows what's going on are people who can get in the field. I wrote a book called Contact Modalities, where I talked about these different people who can get in the field. Like, and I watch a lot of channelers now, and I only deal with trance channelers. And there's a couple of tests that you can give. Somebody can say, no, anybody can channel. I say, $1,000 bet. You cannot channel. I can test you. I know how to test you, and I can show you the difference between your speech and an actual channeler. And there's two different patterns, but I don't really say what it is because I'm waiting for someone to take me up on the bet. And so that's the whole thing. You can get people. It's almost like music. There's some people who can play a little bit. Some people can play pretty good, and then there's some people who are absolutely brilliant and they're gifted and stuff like that. They don't even have to. They've never read music, and they can play and sell massive numbers of songs and stuff like that. So that's basically what it comes down to, is trying to find people who are in the field. And I believe the experiencers, you get experiencers who maybe are making up stuff, but you're going to get experiencers who have gotten information from the beings. And if 40% of the people who are on the ships have the access to everything in the universe, the aliens got access to everything in the universe, which means they ain't here to learn how our DNA works. They're not grabbing rocks and plants and stuff like that. That's not what they're here. They got all the answers to everything. That's not why they're here. So that's basically where the sort of the long story of how I got where I am. And I actually got a little bit sort of down where, to me, it was always like a game. It was like a chess game. It was like, I'm gonna play this, and I'm gonna make sure I know what the other, because I was pretty good at chess when I was a little kid. And I wait for the other player and to see what they're doing and why are they moving that piece. And you don't do anything until the other guy, why that guy moved that piece, what he's planning to do. And so this would be the end of last year, I sort of got down and I figured, yeah, I think I know everything I need. I'm sort of content with it. And I actually lost interest. I'm sort of like, that's not interesting anymore. And then the telepathy tapes happened, which is sort of, I think, was one of the biggest developments that's ever happened, is this thing that became the #1 podcast in the world. And I got the opportunity to interview the producer, one of the first people to interview the producer. And that changed everything, because that really fit into the fact that we're about to prove that there is an element outside of the material world that you can actually prove, and that changes everything.
Yeah, those kids talk about the hill, don't they? Is this place where they can meet and communicate? And the hill, the field, that's just a different name for the same thing, it seems. There was a brilliant quote I thought you'd like from one of the Monroe sessions, one of their channels, and they said, "What we are experiencing is the thought form of our higher self." I
Yep.
thought that was really
Yep.
interesting. And on the subject of that. I've had an apport, and your
Wow.
videos are what taught me what that means. And when you look at the UFO phenomena and think of it in terms of an apport, of something physical popping out of nowhere, and it seems just like that. So you've done some great work on that and written a whole book on it and everything. Would you mind just giving us a little bit on what you found?
Yeah, well, the apport comes off of the theme I always have. I call it the theory of wow.
Mm,
That what they're doing is all they're doing, like putting lights on the craft. All they want you to do is say, "This can't be possible. What's going on?" But I saw it. It's got to be possible. And then people start to explore. So, like the apports, when I see stuff going on in the UFO field, especially the metals, and I went to Hal Puthoff because Hal Puthoff had an experience with an apport. Now, apport is something, there's all these different people, different terms. I just call it apports and manifestations. It's all basically the same thing, whether it's disappearing or reappearing or whatever it's doing. So Hal Puthoff had an experience back in 1972, 73 when they first started the remote viewing stuff. They had Uri Geller there. And Uri Geller, they were in a restaurant, and Uri Geller bit down, and his lip was bleeding, and he pulled this pin out of his mouth. And Edgar Mitchell was sitting at the table, and Edgar Mitchell said, "Where'd you get that from?" That's my flight pin. I lost that in Houston 2 years ago. What are you doing with my flight pin? And so they give it to him, and they go back to the lab, and Uri Geller's in the other room, so they can't be blaming Uri Geller for this fake thing. But so Hal Puthoff and Edgar Mitchell are standing in the other room, and all of a sudden there's dink behind them, and they look behind, and the back half of the flight pin that holds it together is on the floor. And so when these people are doing the metal stuff, and you see it, it's actually kind of funny. It's like you can almost see like the entities are just laughing there, as much as they can in terms of they drop this metal and people go, "Look at this metal. Oh, we're gonna build a flying saucer." And it's like, "Oh, look at this." And I've got a couple of pieces of the stuff, and people are just so infatuated. They figure like this is a piece to the puzzle that's going to figure it all out. And I say, do you actually think that they come from wherever they come from, interdimensional or 1,000 light years away, and then pieces start falling off the craft? Come on. And they're all about the size of your thumb, or the one with the Roswell crash. So you have the Roswell crash, and you have these pieces, and they say you couldn't burn it, you couldn't dent it with a sledgehammer, but this thing hits the ground, it breaks in like a wine glass drop from the top of a skyscraper, into little tiny pieces. Like it doesn't make any sense. And so that's why I was saying, I said to Hal, I said, "Come on, Hal, these are reports. You know they're reports. They're just dropping this stuff to build curiosity and get people with these little pieces, and they're trying to figure it out and stuff like that. And where'd they come from? How, and then they're all layered, they're all weird stuff, but every single piece is different. So they're all layered, like they're layered, or they're put in one atom at a time in rows and stuff like that, or they mess around with the isotopes. The one from the Ubatuba thing that Nolan had the isotopes on one part of the craft was different than the other part, and these isotopes were all messed up. And they said, "What's that mean?" "Oh, no, it doesn't mean anything. It's just they're doing this weird stuff." So you go, "What's wrong with the isotopes? Could they possibly do this? And it would cost $1 billion to do this on Earth and stuff." And so that's this sort of theory of wow. And we started to realize these things were going along a long time. In fact, we were at McDonald's files. James McDonald, I can't remember his first name. He was a researcher in the 1960s. He was a professor at University of Arizona. We went to there, and it was there we actually got a picture of one from 1939. So way before the UFO thing even started, in Illinois, where this thing came flying out of the sky like a meteorite, and the guy was sitting on his porch or whatever, and it dug itself into his garden, and then he went to get it. And it was red hot, which is always the thing. It's red hot, it's molten when it hits the ground, but then it cools down. So he waited for it to cool down. Then he took a knife and he pulled this thing out, and he didn't know what to do with it. So he gave it to his daughter in the 1960s, according to the correspondence that we got with this piece that was filmed. There's a good photograph of it in the file. And he gave it to her. And then in 1968, U.S. was going to put people on the moon. So in NASA had a lab Tucson, Arizona. So she took it to the lab and said, "Oh, this thing came out of the sky, and my father got it in 1939." And then they sent it to the Nickel Company of America, and it's the same thing. It has this weird characteristic to it. It is 99% pure nickel, and it has a copper cord down through the middle of this thing, and it looks like a spike with bubbles on the head is all bubbly. And that's the whole thing. It's these weird things. So no two pieces are the same. The same as no two apports are the same. It's like they do different thing every single time. No two aliens are the same. No two snowflakes are the same. No two leaves on a tree are the same. And you start to get this thing. Even James Lukatsky came when he did this very important interview he does with George Knapp and uh,
Corbell.
Carbell, yeah, where he says, we had 200,000 files, 200,000 UFO sightings in the OSAP file. And he said it was really weird. It's like driving down a street and every car is different. And this is the whole thing that I realized from my days back then. And these things would sort of pop back into your head. Oh, yeah, that's true. That I had two incidents where the object started as one thing. It was sort of on the horizon, and the one time it was flashing. It was like they called it the bouncing ping pong ball. It was jumping around the sky. And as it got closer, it turned into this Charlie Red Star, like a red plasma type object, came in fairly close, but it was started as one object, flashing white object, and it turned into this red thing. And the second time, we were bugging these. Then we called them ground lights. Now they call them orbs, and everybody's trying to rewrite history. Like orbs were around back then, and we didn't even know what they were called. I don't think the name orb was even around, but it was an object that was maybe this big, brilliant white, but would not cast any light onto anything. It'd be sitting right beside something and it would not really even cast any light. It was like a contained light, almost like it was made from light. And the second in 76, we had the experience where we were bugging these ones on the ground, and we were making it. I was flashing 3 times. I had these kids in the car, and they're all going, "Oh, look at that!" And it would flash back 3 times, and you'd go from side to side, and this thing would go side to side and stuff. And these kids are all excited. And all of a sudden, I said, "Oh, there's nothing in this thing. It's just a little tiny thing. It's going to upset them." And the big guys are going to come. And I look on the American horizon because we're about maybe 25 miles from the American border. And you see on the American border, this brilliant arc welding, like, and I go, "Oh no, these kids are going to get abducted. Oh my God. What am I going to do?" And I like, "What am I going to do?" So we go back to the car. And I remember we were sitting there in the car, and these kids are bouncing around. They're just like it's going wild because this thing's coming. I'm going, "Don't turn." And I can see it at the side of my eye. "Don't turn, don't turn." And it starts to turn and go, "Oh no, don't turn." And it starts coming down the road. And I'm going, "Oh no, we're going to abduct it for sure." And down the road it comes. And then I said to the kids, I said, "Give me the binocular, my binoculars." So these kids, I remember they're still jumping around and screaming and yelling as this thing's coming in at us. And I took it, and it was the entire field of vision in the binoculars. That's all I could see was this thing. And it was 3 lights. And it was like triangles. The same thing. Triangles are always different. There's no two triangles are the same. So this one had two red lights in the front and a green light in the back. And it did agree with a lot of the reports where the flat end was coming towards us. It wasn't the point, it was the flat end coming towards us. And it was right above the car. And I'm looking at this thing. So that's the whole thing, that they can change, they can morph, they can change shape. And so it sort of shows us that they're in control. And this idea of sort of counting red ones and green ones and fast ones and slow ones and all this kind of stuff is kind of a waste of time, which is what they're still trying to do in Congress. They're just, if we get a bunch of things where we can monitor. But if you remember back to the days of Skinwalker Ranch, they had all the equipment set up there, and they said the thing would appear off camera. So it knows when you're doing stuff, and it'll just bypass you, and it's having a good time. It's like unless you deal with it as an equal, which is what Bob Bigelow was doing. When they asked him what was it all about, he said it was all about. How can I not remember this? I couldn't remember this the other night when I was talking about it too. It's all about signaling, messaging and gaming. So they're sending messages to us, and he would have this little thing where he had the board with the jacks and the ball, and he would put a certain pattern, and then they would leave it, and the pattern would all change. They would change the pattern, like they were communicating. And so that thing. But if you take a look at what they were doing, you got this whole thing about the reflection idea, that the phenomena reflects what you have, and even Brian and Fugel, who now owns Skinwalker Ranch, always warns people. He comes in with his brother in the helicopter, and they always pray as they come in because they realize this thing will react to, and if you come in with a bad attitude, get ready for a bad experience. And so this is where you start looking at experiencers, why some people have very bad experiences, and why some people have good experiences. We always forget that we are part of the experience, and that is reflective of us. And I was even writing up a piece today where John Mack had even talked about the fact that it's reflective, and that was many years ago, a couple decades ago, where he said that perhaps if you see a gray, that means you're in fear. If you're or see a reptilian, then usually you get these women, and it's all about sex and the greatest sex they ever had, and it's all like high energy stuff. And then you have the etheric beings, which are like the spiritual beings that Chris Bledsoe would see. So you get that reflection idea, and you start to realize that this thing is way more complex than people think. I remember I did a 27 high dose psilocybin sessions, and I only remember a couple of definite things about that thing. And one of the ones was that they, at least four occasions, they talked to me about ego. And that's one of the problems I guess we all have, is this idea that we think we've got it all figured out. And they said, "Do you think you understand what's going on? You haven't got a clue." And they told me this four times, and I kept coming back. And then finally, the one time I came back and they started on this rant again about my ego. And I said, "I'm just here to learn what's going on. What do we keep bugging me about this for?" I said, "I just want to know what's going on. So tell me, what the hell's going on?" And then this voice says, "We don't know either." And I go, "Oh, come on, you don't know what's." And then I guess it was like whatever level they're at, some level, they just know what's below their level. But that's the whole concept, is that we've got a long way to go, and I think we spend too much time on the sighting stuff, which gets you into a bad problem, because what happens with sighting stuff is everybody thinks it's all figured out. The government knows what's going on. It's just a matter of the government admitting at this, and we just got to get one more video. We get a video of a UFO that you can't deny or whatever, and we'll be there. And in that state, you're in a situation where you're always waiting for the next thing, the next video, the next thing, and this is the one that's going to break it. And you see what happens, like whether it's the Jerusalem video or one of the whistleblowers, it's everybody. Everybody's doing podcasts on it, all sort of stuff. And then somebody says, "Oh, it's a hoax," or it didn't go anywhere, and everybody just goes to waits for the next one. And that's the problem I say we have to watch out for, is we are so easy to set up with fake videos and stuff like that, because everybody jumps on them, they don't check them, and they figure it's the next thing, when we have to realize that most of the pieces are missing, that the government, I firmly believe, doesn't really know what you think it knows. Or if it does know, it's very, very compartmentalized, very secret. I do believe they know that the craft, well, even Lakatsky said, he said, we've concluded that the technology is a combination of physical and psychic elements, which is what I wrote in the Sky Pouts, that same idea that the craft is alive, it's conscious, and consciousness is how you move the craft around. But in terms of when he was asked what was the inside was like, he said, "Well, if you knew that, you'd realize the rest of the book was just primitive." Because the craft is like, you even get people who will describe the craft on the inside, like Chris Bledsoe, when he told me he'd flown the craft. I said, "You flew the craft?" And then he's telling me the story. I was taping it. And he said it was like 30 feet on the outside. And he went inside, it was just massive on the inside. And it's like that kind of stuff. We know that kind of stuff's going on, which again indicates that the beings, and they've demonstrated this a couple times. Susie Hansen tells the story where she's on board the craft, and they said, "Okay, watch. We're going to make the craft bigger. And the walls started, these white walls started to move. And she said it went so far she couldn't see the walls anymore. It's that big." And that's the whole thing, is it almost appears like it's happening in a different sort of reality. It's not happening in the physical reality. It seems very physical, like a lucid dream or something like that, but it's not. And that's what the people who flew the craft, a lot of them told me this. They said, "I think it was a dream. It seemed like a dream." And then I'd say, "Everybody thinks it's a dream. Just tell me," because it had this very common characteristic. And yet the weird thing about it was, everybody would touch the craft, but nobody touched the same thing. And I go, "What's the chances of that?" One had a switch, one pushed a button, one put their hands on a panel. Chris Butzel put his hand on a beehive type thing in the middle of it, and no, there was no two the same. And it was this weird thing where it's almost like a dream. Everybody has dreams, but all the dreams are different. And I thought that was so bizarre, how they could possibly have everybody touching something different on the craft of all these people. I had no two that were the same. And at the beginning, I used to think people were lying, because the one woman, you remember she said there was a ball, and she'd put her hand on the over top of the ball. She wouldn't touch the ball, but she just put her hand over the ball, and she could move the craft with just moving her hand. And I'm thinking, where's the panel? Because I was waiting for her to say she put her hands on panel. And I said, there's no panel? No, there was no panel. It was just this ball. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe she imagined it or she's lying or something like this. And then after Lakatsky said all the UFOs were different, then I went, oh, and I went back and looked, and sure enough, all the craft things were different. So there's this sort of an overlay of a story, and yet underneath the story you see everything's different. Like I do one, I haven't shown it yet in public, but I do one with grays, and everybody says, oh, the grays, everybody just assumes there's grays. And so I take a PowerPoint presentation, I put Betty Hill's gray. I say, okay, here's Betty Hill's gray, see it? Yep. And here's Whitley Strieber's gray. Does they look the same? No, not even close. And then I put Betty Andreassen's gray, and then I put Chris Bledsoe's gray, and then I put Ron Johnson's gray, all these grays, where they're coming from, and none of them look the same. And we just make this, we sort of fall into these patterns of saying it. But I think we're moving along, and I think the consciousness thing has come full force, especially when you get these kids who, and I actually asked, I guess about 2 weeks ago, I asked Kai Dickens, who's the producer, I said, hey, do you ever get any aliens? They talk to dead people. They talk to like God, spirit guides, all this kind of stuff there. And they're on this hill, which is pretty peculiar because these kids never leave the house. I mean, they're nonverbal autistic, so they don't go anywhere. They can't button their shirt. And so then when you suddenly you get a kid in California talking about the hill, and you get somebody in Louisiana and then New Jersey, they're all talking about the hill. As I said, this is a major discovery, man. When you got this thing, the hill, that they're all referring to the same place, and they couldn't possibly be faking it or hearing it from other people. So that's basically where we're at now. I think we've realized this consciousness connection, and we realize that this thing is very, very complex, and yet we're still on this whole thing because it's run by the military in the United States. Like I'm doing a book coming up where I'm saying I'm against government UFO disclosure. I don't want that to happen. I want true to UFO disclosure, which is the experiencers, because what you see now, and I've warned about it since day one, since they first announced this is a fear thing. This is the military. So if they say, well, no, we're investigating. No, you're not. Because if you want to investigate UFOs, you'd put it in front of the Science and Technology Committee at the House and the Senate. That's not what it is. It's armed services and intelligence because they want to do weapons. This is what it's about. It's about guys getting patents. They realize that there's a lot of money in this thing. If you can develop something, the metal that they've got or something like that, it's worth billions of dollars. And everybody knows that. So they're trying, I just call it like stealing the saucers. So everybody knows that Lockheed and Boeing and all these people have saucers, and everybody's trying to force the saucer out into the public so they can work on it and they can maybe unsolve it and stuff like that. And I think that it probably is not going to happen maybe for a long time because the United States is a culture of fear. It's fear based on fear on time, fear on fear and fear. And what they've done is they've developed, like they had first in 42, they had secret to protect the hydrogen bombs. They had secret and confidential. And then they added top secret. Then they added top secret SCI. You added special clearance. And then the waived unacknowledged special access programs that you have to lie about, that only 8 people in Congress are told about and stuff. And you just build levels and levels of secrecy. And now we're trying to get down to those levels of secrecy. So I say it's all legal. It's totally legal. You just got to change the law because they made these laws that said if you're in a waived unacknowledged special access program, you have to lie about it. And then people say, well, they're lying. Well, of course they're lying because that's what they're told to do. That's part of the rules. So it's kind of a mix of stuff where I think as long as we stay away from the sort of the disclosure and the evil alien thing, which is total nonsense. Because of course I'm from Canada now, and so I'm starting to bug the Americans. I say, you talk about threat. You think the aliens are? Do you think anybody in Canada thinks the aliens are a threat? You ask anybody in Canada, who's the threat? And they go, the United States of America, because like now they're trying to take us over and stuff like that. And people are just petrified here. It's unbelievable about what's going on. And but they're pushing this threat narrative of the aliens. And I say, who's the ones that dropped the atomic bomb? I mean, when the aliens dropped the first atomic bomb, give me the petition about the aliens, and maybe I'll sign the petition. But until then, we've met the enemy, and he is us. We're the crazy people. We're the ones that they came down, and they'll say, well, they're after our nuclear weapons. And I say, well, thank God somebody can turn the nuclear weapons off if it comes to it, down to it, like sort of like, and they'll say they're in our airspace. And it's like, no, they were here first. It's their airspace. Land your planes. It's their airspace. You just think that you can say it's your airspace and they have to stay out. No, so I have some fun with this, and but everybody's on sort of a different page of where they're going. And in the end, we'll all figure it out. But that's what the intelligence is doing. doing it. They're using the theory of wow. So they're just doing these weird things like cattle mutilations and stuff like that, where people going, or crop circles. Like, how'd they do that? Holy cow, maybe a hoax, but how'd they do that? And what they're trying to do is get us to realize the world is not the way you think it is, and force us to figure it. Rather, the way we do it, we do a very left brain thing. We come in to give a lecture. We say, we're here to bring you freedom and democracy, Jesus and McDonald's. And then next thing they're pointing guns and saying, get the hell out of my country. Who do you think you are? And this sort of stuff. And that's basically what it's come down to, is that the phenomena is going to force us to figure it out. And what they do is consciousness. So when you do your podcasts, I do my podcasts and my books and stuff like that. The more we talk about it, the more it's out there, the more it will gravitate to the fact that everybody will figure it out. Because as Max Planck said, who invented quantum physics, we think that we're not being treated fairly. People don't respect us and stuff like that. They don't take us seriously, and they should believe in UFOs and stuff like that. Well, Max Planck, who invented quantum physics, had stated in whatever 1915 or whatever, he said, you do not win by convincing your opponent he's wrong. Science advances when your opponent dies. And one funeral at a time, the new generation is not offended with the ideas. So we don't think we're getting anywhere, but you can go in the darkest corners of the world and you can say, Area 51, I know what that is. UFO, I know what that is. Near-death experience, I know what that is. And we don't realize that all these terms are all rising up, and the old people may not believe it, but the consciousness is rising, and the new generation is going to come along and say, well, of course, that's all real. And that's what happened in 2017. I believe the government was acclimatizing us to the UFO situation, because I wrote an article in 2009 that talked about the 64 reasons they've decided not to tell you the truth. And I said, like Stephen Greer and people were putting out stuff, oh, the stock market's going to melt down, people are going to jump off bridges and stuff like that. And then in 2017, they said, oh, yeah, the government is working on UFOs. And what happened? Nothing. Nobody jumped off a bridge. Nobody panicked, nothing. Everybody's like, yeah, we know that already. Or people talk about catastrophic disclosure. We don't want catastrophic disclosure. I said, catastrophic disclosure? What could be catastrophic? And they said, well, they got bodies and crafts. I said, I guarantee you, everybody's going to go, yeah, we knew that already. Come on, tell me something new. And that's what's happening is that we don't realize and the catastrophic disclosure, I believe, is created by the people who are just trying to create more fear. You got to do this because they're evil aliens. There's going to be catastrophic disclosure. We're not going to be able to control it. And they're making up all these excuses why the government should give them everybody a suitcase full of money to walk away with. And everybody wants to live on a big hill, on a big house on the top of the hill. And that's basically what's going on, is they're trying to get Congress. But now you see that Trump is moving back sections of the government and laying off all these people, and UFOs may be going by the wayside because he's talking about cutting the defense budget in half. And I can't see that UFOs is going to be remaining, as they're going to want to spend money on this, even though, because that's what Walker told us back in the day. He said, admit it. You're just curious. Admit it. And I challenge researchers with this now all the time. And because Walker said, you're just curious, admit it. And people say, no, I'm not. And I say, yeah, you're curious. So well, what do you want? Oh, disclosure. Why? Well, then I'll know. Well, that's you answer your curiosity. Then you're going to say where they're from. And then they're going to tell you where they're from. Okay, how did they get here? And then it's question. It's this curiosity thing. And then Walker actually asked, he said, and which most researchers don't even think about for 1 second. Walker said to us, okay, so when you figure it out, what are you going to do with it? And people don't have an answer to that. They sort of figure like the UFOs are going to land, and then in the United States of America, they're going to allow grays, reptilians, and mantids to walk the streets of America. I don't think so. Neither are they going to allow the grays to build a factory beside Tesla and create cars that cost $1,000 that with no engine and no fuel and anything like that. I mean, the technology, there's no way they're going to allow these people into society. So it's still going to be like Art Bell told me when I was interviewed by him years ago. He said, I'm going to shoot them as they come off the craft. And I think that's what it is. But people sort of have this idea it's going to be kumbaya, that they're going to land on the White House lawn, they're going to give us all this technology, and they're going to go home again. And that's not going to happen. There's no way. That's not why they're here. But that's what everybody's looking at, is they're looking at, in the United States, it's number one rule is money, number two rule is money, number three rule is money. So it's all about money, and everybody knows there's a lot of money if you can back engineer this thing. But the phenomena has actually said, and I'll stop here, the phenomena actually said at one point, do not go down the technology route. It's a trap. And I think that's what it is. It's this idea that we've never figured out anything about the technology. Lockheed Skunk Works was going to give Bob Bigelow a craft because they had to store it. It was costing them huge money to store this thing with all the security, and they couldn't figure it out because they had this consciousness aspect to it. And so a guy, I think by the name of James Ryder, who was the vice president at Lockheed, had handed this thing over he was going to hand it over, but the Air Force and the CIA blocked it and said, not only do you not get to give it away, but you have to keep this thing forever in security. You can never release it or anything like that. And they're just bleeding money from this thing because it has this consciousness interface to it that they really can't figure out. And it's almost like the idea of, starting a car with you have the little things now where when you're near the car, it'll automatically open up. It's that kind of thing where it's not a key, it's not anything like that. It's this interface that you need, and it's the consciousness interface, which you'll get experiencers. So that's where you get the experiencers, and they all say, "Oh, I've flown the craft and whatever," and then they can tell. Like Chris Bledsoe will tell me, he'll say, when they're in the area, I know they're in the area because I've touched the craft, I've vibrated with the craft, it vibrates at a certain frequency, and when it's in the area, I don't have to see it. I know it's there because I can feel the vibration.
I think that touches back on the intention thing, doesn't it? Like my mum's a psychic medium, and I've asked her loads of times, like trying to analyze how what the modality is, and she says, I don't need to know how an engine works to drive a car, and it seems like exactly the same thing with the UFO phenomenon. There's just one thing I really wanted to touch on. So, where you said before about how they're trying to quietly get this into the public language, about everybody knowing about where Area 51 is. And Hollywood seems to be an obvious place where that's come from. I know you've spoken before about Spielberg's sister being involved with intelligence. Now, I spoke to the writer of Flight of the Navigator from the 80s, because
Wow.
that's one movie where it's a transmedium, interdimensional craft that communicates by consciousness. And it's like, oh my God, we're 40 years in, and this is breaking news now. And I asked him, like, oh, did you by any chance have any input from the Pentagon? He's like, oh, yeah, yeah, I had an advisory. And he gave me a few tips about a few things to throw in. It's like, how? So the question though is why? I mean, if they're trying to keep this secret, if it's indigestible, as Jim Semivan says, why are they bleeding out bits and bobs through Close Encounters and all of these great 80s movies?
Yeah, well, I guess one of the things would be that you want to control a story. So it's like Jim Semivan said to Chris Bledsoe. He said, if we wanted you dead, you would have been dead 10 years ago. We don't do that anymore. So they're not going to try to stop you, but what they're going to try to do is control the story. So I don't know if you remember back in 2012, the guy by the name of Chase Brandon was around. And he tells the story. He was supposed to write a second book. He only wrote the first book called the Christos Conundrum, which was the fictional version of the CIA's dealing with the Roswell crash. And his job was to go to Hollywood, that when somebody in Hollywood was doing a movie that involved the CIA, instead of trying to force them, what you try to do is manipulate them. So he would go along and he'd say, oh, are you doing a movie on the CIA? And then the guy would say, yeah, I'm from the CIA. Have you ever been to the CIA? And the guy would go, nope. Would you like to go to the CIA? Would you like to take a tour? And maybe that would help you with your script and stuff. And that's what they do. They slowly walk, almost like somebody's begging on the street, trying to get money on the street. They don't confront you face to face. They sort of walk alongside you. And that's this idea where they're sort of manipulating it. And it may be the fact that they realize you can't keep the story. You can't have people back in 1947, but you can control the story, and they have controlled the story very well. I mean, even we were referencing the whole thing about Close Encounters of the Third Kind and this Holloman Air Force Base film. What happened there was I came up with a story, and Bob told me, Bob Emenegger, who was the producer, told me definitely it was 1971 when this happened. And then Richard Doty came out and said, no, 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 it was 1964, and they were on White Sands Missile Base, and they got lost. And it was like, yeah, sure, they got lost. That's sort of, and so then what happens is, then Linda Howe is telling one story that she got from Richard Doty. It's 1964. I'm telling the story 1971, and nobody knows who to believe. We started arguing about who's right, who's wrong, and stuff like that. And that's what they do. All I say is what they do is they throw mud in the water. So if you get a really good story, you'll have second guy come on with a story that's pretty close, but that's sort of, counters the guy's first story. And people always forget that, as Eric Davis pointed out, for any like waived unacknowledged special access program, they spend 10 times the money on security as they do on the program. So I say to people, if you think that these whistleblowers are just walking out and telling you stuff, just tell me, what are they spending the 10 times the money on? Because everybody just assumes that no, these people are just coming forward. And you don't get to realize these guys have done this since World War II or before World War II. They know how to do counterintelligence. They know exactly how to, like a magician, misdirect you and then pull the trick and stuff like that. So I think that's in some ways what they're doing. Because if you remember back the RAND study in the early 1960s, it was written, and they said you have to acclimatize the people. If you don't acclimatize the people, it's like the lower culture will completely disappear when they're faced with a very advanced culture. So I think they've got psychologists in there who are trying to tell them what to do, and they're keeping secrets. Even this latest guy, you hear this all the time, and I say to people, I was even talking to Bob McGuire last night, who worked in high level intelligence, said, Bob, I still understand this thing. So you have this guy, comes forward and he's picking up the thing off the ground or whatever. And he's able to come out and say this. And I said, this is the most highly classified secret in the United States. I said, you worked on special unacknowledged special access programs. Were you allowed to just walk out and say this? It's almost like saying, I'm going to tell you who in Soviet Union, which Americans are spying in the Soviet Union or working for the Americans. And I want whistleblower protection. Well, no, this is classified material. You go to jail for that. And that's what sort of amazes me. Even though the last one they brought up that Lou Elizondo started talking about this project. I can't remember the code name for it was, but they were going to put an aircraft carrier with nuclear weapon, all stuff, and they were going to attract the UFOs. And he said, and then he said, the other one was Haystack. He said, what about Haystack? Well, I can't talk about Haystack, but I can talk about this other one. Well, who gave you permission to talk about something? I mean, if the UFOs don't exist, if UAPs is all nonsense, the way they say, how did they allow you to go and you say you got permission to talk about this thing where they're going to bring the UFOs in to drag them in, and then you've got all these stuff to monitor them and to describe what they're doing, stuff like that. I said, this doesn't make any sense to me. This is, and then one guy pointed out that on Tom DeLonge's guitar, it has this code name of the first one that he said he could talk about, and Haystack or whatever it was the second one. And that's like back 2015, 2016. So Elizondo was already telling him back the second code name that he said he can talk about. And it's always this thing like, and so I look at Elizondo and I go, he may be telling the truth, but who's he working for? Is he actually, because I was very hesitant about his, when I wrote 4 books. I've got my 5th book on disclosure coming out. I wrote about his, and I say, no matter what anybody says, the resignation letter doesn't make any sense whatsoever. There's no way, because his resignation letter, number one, all you have to do is look up Department of Defense memo, and on Google under photographs, and you'll see. And every single one of them is the way the government works. Is everything's done exactly the same way as everybody else. So when you write a memo, you have a date, and it's on the right side, and it's come down about an inch below the banner, and every single memo has a date on it. So Lou Elizondo doesn't have a date on it, and he's saying, I'm retiring on Monday or something like that. So when did he retire? And this is the whole deal. You look at it, and if you look at the letter and you don't know the story behind it, you don't know when it was, 1910 or 2017 when he retired. And that's the whole thing. And then he's retiring. And I retired from the University of Manitoba, which was run by the Canadian government. And so I know that when you retire, you don't retire. I didn't retire to the president of the University of Manitoba. I retired to my immediate superior. So the retirement letter should have been his immediate superior, not the Secretary of Defense. If everybody in the Secretary of Defense sent their resignation letter to the Secretary of Defense, that's all he'd be able to do all day long is read people's resignation letters. There's thousands of people every day retiring. So there was that kind of stuff. And then it was this sort of thing that, Sheehan had said that he was running the program for the space guys, the UAP program for the space guys. So I think he may be like Chase Brandon, that he's there, but he's got someone who tells him you can say this, you can't say this, and you can see he's got a new leak every second week about some new thing that this and dropping it, and it's moving it. It's almost like the breadcrumb thing where they're moving us along, but they're containing the program where you can't get the actual program, you can't get the actual documents. It's all these rumors and stuff like that, which is basically telling us what's going on, but nobody can confirm it. And that's what the government, I think they'd be happy with that. that they've got the story under control. People, these guys that have done intelligence for years know how to keep the story under control, and it's moving along. And you have these highly classified programs because people say they're lying to the government, and I say no, they're not lying to the government, because if you look at the Lukatsky interview that he does with George Knapp, he says, I was in a congressional facility. And I say, for people who don't understand, that's a congressional facility. I mean, you're saying you're not telling Congress? He's in a congressional facility telling Congress. And he said, I've got a senator with me. And that was Harry Reid, senator. And he was one of the Gang of Eight. And that's what Jim Semivan says. I believe the Gang of Eight is being briefed. They tell them, we've got these programs, we can't tell you about them, but we got these programs, and that's legally all you have to do. So this idea, and then they said we got inside the craft, and everybody forgets the whole thing about the senator being in the room, and all they want to know is what's inside the craft. You got inside the craft. Where's the craft from? Was it an egg-shaped craft? And all this sort of stuff. And everybody gets sort of lost with the story and don't realize that the Kasky's dropping these little hints. And so I do believe it's legal. I believe that the Gang of Eight is sort of told about this kind of stuff, but they can't talk about it either. Like people say, well, the president doesn't get briefed. I did this for years. And people say the president doesn't get briefed. I go, no, I think the president gets briefed. But how would you know that the president doesn't get briefed? The only person that knows if the president got briefed is the president and the person who briefed him. That's all the people know. If you're down below, I say, it's the same thing. I was a manager of a bunch of buildings at the University of Manitoba. I had 1.23 buildings at the University of Manitoba, and I had keys to everything. I had master keys, grandmaster keys. I had everything. I had keys to 10,000 rooms that I could go in. I had the president's key, their office, the president of the university. I had 8 vice presidents. I had human resources. I had payroll. I had keys to all those rooms. And I retired 6 months before a major buyout. Do you think I would have retired early if I knew what was going on? I didn't know what was going on. I had my little job that I knew. The guy working in the office beside me was doing a different job. I didn't know what he was doing. And everybody thinks because you're in the government, you know what's going on. Not true at all. There may be certain people, and all you need, whether you're in, say, Canada or Great Britain or Australia, all you need is one guy inside that government. You don't need a whole department. And he's reporting back to the U.S. government, the U.S. Black Ops, as to what's going on. That's all you need. Like these moles that are inside, and they sit there very comfortably and do their job. And every once in a while, they feed back what's going on. So this is what I think is the situation, that there is a program. And in fact, the MJ12 people said no, MJ12 doesn't exist. In a couple of books I've written about MJ12 for pages and pages. I mean, there's piles of people who've talked about MJ12 and its existence. But the thing is, it was never confirmed. So everybody says, oh, the documents were fake. Yeah, the documents were fake, but MJ12 is still real. So what they do, and all you have to do with a document, is you have to change one word in the document, and you say it's a fake. Nobody knows. Or I heard stories that they put in stuff like a comma or something like that, or the things that they would, and the other one would have, this have a comma, this one would have a comma, this one would have something else, and they could tell exactly where the documents were moving based upon which document would show up, just by making little tiny changes that you would never notice. And to find out, and a lot of this stuff is leaking, is to find out who's leaking. So you put a material out, and then it starts to leak around, and then you can tell exactly who's in the line of people trying to break your secret.
That's one of the things they were saying about Bob Lazar, wasn't it? That as part of the huge briefing that he'd got, potentially some of it was unique to him, so that they would know if he'd spoken about it afterwards. In particular, whichever version of the story comes out, they know where the hole in the system is. Just before we go on, there was another part of that Lukatsky interview, and I was pulling my hair out because it seemed like he was trying to offer a hint. And the guy, I mean, I appreciate how difficult it is when you're interviewing somebody and you're in the groove, but he was saying a good question is, why was there a member of the Brazilian military there?
Yeah.
So the obvious thing is, well, the Varginha crash, like, where did that one go? Like, is that potentially the thing that they're getting into? But it just kind of, it slipped by the wayside. So I just wanted to talk about very briefly, like Russell Targ. Like we've been through the CIA. There's unclassified documents where they're classifying all these different types of psi phenomena, from perturbation and ESP. And then Russell was told in the late 70s, I think, that no matter how successful this is, eventually we're gonna have to end it in failure, just so that people don't realize that they can do all this stuff at home and we lose all of our military secrets. So do you think that's kind of where we are now? Because it's still what people, that horrible term woo, to talk about things like the telepathy tapes, which it's fantastic that it's coming from these kids that have been kind of left on the wayside, that we might be discovering the missing link to this whole UFO phenomena. And with things like the hitchhiker effect, it seems like consciousness is that's the indigestible part that Jim Semivan's talking about. So, where do you realistically see this conversation going next?
Well, I think people are going to start now moving towards it, even though the Seoul conference has upset me with they made a statement that they weren't going to allow lectures on woo. They don't deny that it's a major phenomena because like Gary Nolan is an experiencer. He gets downloads and stuff like that. And what they said was first we're going to teach people the reality of the nuts and bolts craft. But that's what we've done for 80 years. I said, let's not do any more of that. No, that's what we can do. We can't get that. And so you've got to, if you're a pure scientist, as even Gary Nolan says, why would a scientist take anything off the table? I think this is the key part of the secret that they're covering up, the part that they really don't understand that well. Because if you remember, and I think James Ryder may have been the guy who was in the room. If you remember the story that Tom DeLonge tells, he's in the skiff, in the Lockheed skiff, and the president is there. So it was Robert Weiss, and then he said the head scientist was there, and this other guy was there, and I believe it may have been James Ryder. And James Ryder says to him, whoever it was, says to him, "So, how did you get here? That's all I want to know. How did you get here? What's the propulsion system?" And then DeLong was hanging around with Stephen Greer. So that's when he said, um, I think consciousness is involved. And then the guy said, "Now you're talking." And he said, "It's all the guy wanted to talk about for 45 minutes was consciousness." And yet Lockheed was going to give the saucer away to Bigelow because they had the consciousness interface on it, and they couldn't get anything. They had it since what, 1947 or whatever, and they couldn't get it to do anything. And they were spending all this money to keep it classified. So I think that's where they're working, even though I think that the government may have unveiled some of this stuff. If you've followed, I go off to this Ron Pandolfi guy, who's maybe the guy who briefs the president of the United States. And he's always they're always hinting at this thing with portals. And I remember at one time I sort of introduced a bunch of people to him. They all became friends with him, and then he fights with me, and so I know he's an okay guy. And I think this is just his job to sort of call me a schizophrenic and a crook and all this sort of stuff
A
on.
crook and a loon.
Yeah, and I'm the only one he interacts with on Facebook, which tells you something. He doesn't interact with anybody. He's only got four common friends with me on the internet, three common friends with me on the internet. But he talks about the portal, and his wife comes through the portal, and all this sort of stuff. And then I said to one of his friends that I introduced him to, who became good friends with him, I said, "Hey, I can't take this anymore. This is crazy. I mean, it's like the UFO, and a lot of people get frustrated with the UFO thing because it goes round in circles and it doesn't go anywhere. And that's what was happening with the Pandolfi portal thing. I knew there was some truth to it because I had got this video, and that's why he keeps calling me a crook, because I got the video of him talking when his wife, they're going on a cruise through the Panama Canal. And they're in this restaurant, and his wife says, "So, footman," that was just like, she's the princess, and he's the footman that takes care of her, all this code stuff they use. And footman, what do you say? And he said, "Well, people have always wondered what it's like to go into the next world. There's been a breakthrough. And the next time John," he looks over at this John Sullivan guy who's sitting right beside him, "next time John goes to the desert, a number of us here will go into the next world and come back again." And I went, "Oh my God." And I grabbed this thing off the YouTube, eh? And then Bruce Maccabee showed it to him that I had this video, and he said, "That Cameron's a crook. That's a crook." And I said, "Well, good. Who wouldn't steal it?" It was like, so I knew that they were into this. This portal thing was probably real, but it just wasn't going anywhere. And I said to one of his friends, I said, "I don't know. I don't, I think I'm just gonna give up on this thing. It drives me crazy." Because the big question in ufology, I always say, is not what are UFOs, it's what's Ron Pandolfi doing. He's just such an enigma. What's he doing? Like what, is he covering up, or is he disclosing, and all this sort of stuff? He keeps saying they're going to disclose. And then, so anyway, I said to his friend, and I said, "Do you think I should leave? Do you think I should give up on it?" There's this pause. And he says, "No, I should probably hang around." I go, "Really? Okay." And so I waited for another couple of years, and nothing really changed again. And then he said to me, we were talking hockey all the time, this guy and I. So we weren't even talking UFOs. He said, Grant, remember that question you asked me a couple of years ago? I said, yeah, it's real. I said, it is. It's like, because he was always being promised by Pandolfi's wife that she would eventually tell him about the portal, but it is not what you think, and you won't be told until you're ready. And so then I had the honor of meeting this oh shoot, no, don't forget his name. Tim, the NASA guy.
Tim Taylor.
Tim Taylor. So I met him in 2013 at a cabin in Pennsylvania. He had come there to see Chris Bledsoe, and he was only there. He was there less than a day. We were there for a couple days, and he headed back. And but during the time, I didn't know who he was. I didn't know he was this high level guy. And he was talking to me, and I knew he had to download because we were talking downloads. I had to download the consciousness download in 2012. This is 2013. And he's talking about his download that he got for this invention that the company sold for $100 million on NASDAQ. And he's telling me about this whole idea that, the night before, Grant, he said, the night before I got that idea in my head when I woke up, the last thing I remember the night before was a hooded figure standing at the end of the bed. And I said, "Oh, really? Could you see its face?" And he goes, "No, I couldn't see its face because that's the deal. You can't see the face of the hooded being, eh?" And then I said, "Oh, you should be regressed. You go to LA. He works with children with cancer in operating rooms and stuff because all this stuff is medical stuff that he downloads, 44 patents or whatever he has." And I said, "Well, you go to Los Angeles all the time. You should go to Yvonne Smith. She's in Los Angeles. She can regress you and you can find out who the being was and go in." And he said, "Yeah, well, I'm able to do that." And I don't think he ever did. At least Yvonne doesn't remember him coming. And anyway, so then he starts showing me these photographs, and the way it's almost the same thing that they don't really tell you what's going on. They want you to figure it out. So he shows me his cell phone, and he says, "Hey, Graham," he says, "what do you think of this?" And he shows me this picture, and these two guys are flying through space on this painting, and they look like they're in pajamas. And one guy's old, one guy's young. And I said, "I don't know, Tim. I have no idea." And then he said, "What about this?" And he shows me these all these balls going down a tunnel. It's a painting of these balls going down a tunnel, and they're getting smaller as they go down the tunnel. And I go, "I don't know." And he shows me another thing, and then this outer space thing on the side of the building. And I go, "I don't know, Tim. I have no idea." And then he shows me this car on top of a parkade, a 56 or 57 Chevy. And he says, look at the back seat. Can you see the back seat there?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "It's a postcard. You know what it says?" I said, "No, I don't know what it says." And he says, "It's a guy writing to his girlfriend and says, 'I wish I could travel through time and space to be with you.'" And I said, "Really? That's what it says?" And he said, "Yeah." He says, "You know where this is?" And then I said, "No, I have no idea." He says, "Hughes Aircraft Building." And it's outside of LAX. And I said, "I still don't know what you're talking about." And then he says, I can't remember. People always ask me this, whether he actually said, "This is where the jump room was," or "This is where the jump room was supposed to be," or something. I just remember he just basically indicated this was the jump room building. And I said, "Really? Let me see those photographs again." And the first two of these guys flying through space. And he says, "You know where that one is?" And I said, "No, where is it?" He said, "It's right outside the elevator." I said, "Really?" Because the whole story of this jump room thing was they go into the elevator up to the fifth floor and then they go to Mars. And this is supposed to be right in front of the. So I actually contacted and Andy Basiago, who was the guy that started the story about him and Barack Obama going to Mars. And I said, "Andy, so because there's two buildings and they're linked by this parkade in between." And so I said, were you in the front building or the back building?" He said, "I was a young kid. I don't remember I was in the front building or the back building." And so that was the thing. He sort of hinted to me and he gave me this. And then he taught me the important lesson. It was this idea that he was watching Chris Bledsoe because the whole idea was Chris Bledsoe's being contacted. So why would you not follow this guy and find out what's happening to him? Because that's where you're going to get the answers. You got to find out who knows what's going on here. And then he had two others that he had. They were girls. And I don't know if he phoned the first girl, she wasn't home or whatever. He said, "Well, this other girl, she used to live near where you are." And I said, "Where?" And she said, "Steinbach, Manitoba." I said, "Oh, hell, it's like 30 miles from my city." And he said, "Well, do you want to talk to her?" And I said, "Yeah, sure." And I'm on Tim Taylor's cell phone. He phones her up and I'm talking, "Hey, Connie, how you doing?" And she's telling me, "Yeah, I had this experience at 5 years old." So I got to know her and actually just corresponded with her. She just wrote me just yesterday about a vision that she has about goes to these. I was asking her about the drones because now you have all these drones, and which I think is theory of wow as well. Like there were five drones, and there's 100, 50, and then there's 100 drones, and they're just laughing. They're just up in the ante. There's more and more drones all the time. They want people to talk about it. And the New Jersey drones, everybody's talking about them. That's what they want. They want people to talk about it, and people want to wonder and question the material world. So I said to her, I said, "You had this vision about these UFOs all over the place, and they were trying to shoot them down." And she said, yeah, but they were shooting SAM missiles. And my viewpoint was up in the saucers. I was up with the saucers, but there were saucers all over the sky and they were trying to shoot these things down. But she didn't think it related to the drones. But this is the whole thing. When I saw the drones, I said, oh, Connie had this vision because she had these visions and she actually was recording it for Tim Taylor, what visions she was having, what kind of experiences she was having, all these kind of stuff, because she had a lot of premonitions that she was getting. She even told the phenomena at one point to stop doing it. She couldn't take it anymore because there's these things like, and I looked up some of these. There's one, a train crash in China that she had gotten where they're on a train track and both the trains, these high-speed trains are on the same track and it's an elevated track and there's mountains in the background. And I actually found the photograph of the mountains with the train hanging off the side of the track and stuff like that. And she had gotten that. And then the second one she got was, I think in Utah, there was a coal mine and there were 16 guys who were down in this coal mine and they had an explosion in the coal mine. So they sent 3 rescuers in to rescue them, and those 3 guys died. We were trying to rescue them, and then she was with the guys alive down in the thing as nobody rescued them. And it was these kind of visions she was getting. She just said, I can't take it anymore. I don't want this anymore. And then she said it stopped for quite a while. And then she said, oh, okay. I mean, if that's the way it's got to be. And then she started having these visions again. And her son is an experiencer. But that's the whole thing is you get these people. And if Tim Taylor is going to watch these people closely, why would you and I not watch these people? Everybody thinks it's because it's anecdotal. Well, the Nimitz was anecdotal as well. I mean, what these guys claimed they saw, and even the thing with, I laugh, when they say, oh, we saw the bubbles in the water. And I say, yeah, sure. It was like the guy say, hey, Zovar, go make some bubbles in the water. The planes are coming. Right? But let's really, and then they're laughing like, look at they're looking at the bubbles. It's like, and that's what I think they're doing. It's like they're not really doing anything. I even ask people who have UFO sightings. The first question I ask them is I say, so what was it doing? And they go, I don't know. It wasn't doing anything. It was just there. Do you think it saw you? Yeah, I think so. Do you think it saw you? You knew that you saw it? Yeah, I think so. And do you think it wanted you to see it? Yeah, I think so. And it's like, but what was it doing? Nothing. It was just there. And that's the thing. It just shows up for certain people and that they want you to see it almost like you've preordained this thing. You came into the world. And I remember I have a big business guy who used to live back where I live. And he had this experience where he was watching a movie. It was like a UFO movie or something. At the very end, the last 15 minutes or whatever, he said to his wife, he says, I think I'm going to go outside and skywatch. And she says, I'm going to go skywatch. There's 15 minutes left in the movie. Why would you go and skywatch right now? He said, I just think I should go skywatch. And he goes walking out of the house with his laser. And he says, this UFO goes fly. As soon as he walks out of this UFO and he's at a cabin and it flies by and he hits it with a laser. And he goes, oh, that's pretty stupid. Why'd you hit it with the laser? And then later on, him and his wife both have a sighting in the city. And he sees it and it's a ball. It's a ball of gas. He's right on the river. So this is coming down the river and it's this ball of gas burning, rolling down the river. And he says, just like, come on, come on, come on. She's on they have 2 decks and she's on the upper deck, or he's on the upper deck. She's on the lower deck. And she says, yeah, I see it. And it goes by or whatever. And then he says, he never talks to her about it. And years later, he's at a party or something like that. And somebody says, hey, Mark, you had a UFO sighting? Yeah, yeah. And he tells him about this thing. And he's telling about the one with the gas ball rolling down the river. And his wife says, what do you mean? It wasn't a gas ball. And he said, yes, it was. You saw it. She says, no, it wasn't. It was a saucer. It was a metallic saucer. He said, it was. and that's where you get this whole idea that if you think you're going to solve this thing by analyzing UFO photographs and stuff, you're not. Because there's even the story that was told by Colm Kelleher at Skinwalker Ranch where there's 6 guys with the Gen 3 night vision goggles and the thing comes over the ridge and flies right by them and they all take a look and at the end of the night they compare the notes and everybody saw something different. And that's the whole thing, is that we got to get away from this sort of idea that a certain craft means it's from a certain planet or whatever and that we can build it. We're going to figure out how it works by the shape or whatever, because they can morph. I've seen that, and this is this whole idea that they can appear as whatever they want to appear, and it may be this idea that we have to start looking at our impressions of how we see things, because our left brain is putting all this stuff together, and it's believe whatever you see is what you believe. So we started to believe the world was flat. We believed the sun went around the earth. We believed there was only 5,000 stars. We believed everything was solid. It's wrong, wrong, wrong. Everything that we perceive is wrong. And that's, I think, one of the main messages they're trying to tell us is it's not what you think it is. And so they do these weird things that force you to say, well, if everything is solid, how do people go through walls? And people start thinking, how do you go through a wall? And then you start to realize that nobody ever sees anybody being abducted. So are they actually being abducted? Or is this a type of thing where it's in a different reality where these people are flying the craft where they say, it was a dream. It's like almost like it was a dream. And it may be once you get into this higher realm, it's like a dream type thing where there's no time and space and everything's kind of weird and you know what's going on. Or one of the aliens, I think it was Bashar said, we come to you in your dreams because now you're in our world. And it may be just that they bring you into this world. Or I make the joke about, like I think about weird things that people you normally don't think about, is why does an alien wake you up? You see this, all these stories, they wake you up. It goes, "Boop, boop, boop, boop. Hey, 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 Tom, wake up, wake up." And then you wake up and you see this evil looking alien and you go, oh my God. And then it's the basic rule I wrote at the beginning of my book on psychedelics is surrender is the rule. Believe me, surrender is the only rule. I had these very bad experiences in psychedelics, and I realized that once you surrender, I was in this hell type experience. I said, oh, I couldn't get out. I couldn't get it. And it kept going on. And I went, oh my God, well, I can't blame anybody for this except for myself. I guess this is hell. I'm going to live in hell for the rest of my life. That's it. That's the way it's going to be. And boom, it's gone like that. Just and it was, suddenly I was in the higher realm, and it was this whole idea you gotta surrender. So you take a look at the being when he's poking the guy, and the guy surrenders. It's like, oh, I'm gonna get eaten by this alien, and he sort of surrenders, and then he goes to his buddy. He says, "Hey, buddy, he's ready. He's ready to go. Let's take him." Because he's surrendered, and you can move his astral body. And that's what they're trying to get you to dissociate. The same as children who become mediums. When they get older, they have childhood sex abuse issues and stuff like that. They're trying to cut out the world. And suddenly they're talking to dead people because they're trying to cut out the physical world. And it's this idea that there's a field, but a lot of the ways you get in the field is by ripping the field by trauma, near-death experience, an alien experience that's very traumatic or whatever, a traumatic experience, stuff like that. That's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to get you to dissociate, so your left brain shuts down. Because once your left brain shuts down, then your right brain, the female brain, can tap into the universe, and that's where it is. The left brain is to keep you in the physical world and get you to do the physical stuff and keep you alive. But it in spiritual things or UFO things, it's really a hindrance. It's blocking everything. It's causing noise in the signal. And once you can get that left brain out of the way, you can pick up the signal. It's not like anybody's better than anybody else. It's just some people have learned how to get rid of that noise.
That's what Dr. John Mack said, wasn't it? He said that we need to get past the idea that this thing's coming into our reality, and we need to realize that it's taking us into theirs. I'm amazed that you just mentioned near death because I'm working on a documentary right now
Wow.
where I'm interviewing different people that have had a near-death experience because we spoke to a great new friend, Scott Gearan, who was a paratrooper paramedic, and he had a horrible parachute accident, and he had this near-death experience, and he said there were these entities there, and he couldn't see their face, and they were communicating him to him with consciousness, and there was kind of no sense of time. So I thought, oh my God, this sounds like an abduction. Since then, he's had these amazing UFO experiences. So I sent a message out just saying, look, if anybody's had a near death and feels like talking about it, I'd love to hear your stories. And there's people from all around the world, and it's
Wow.
all there was this big bright light. There were these little entities that I couldn't see, or I was in this corridor and there's no sense of scale. And you could swap a flying saucer for this near-death experience, and they come back, and then after that, probably 8 out of 10 are seeing flying saucers, or they're having this complete switch into unified consciousness, and we're all one great field of, we're all one great shard of God, and we are the source, and all this kind of stuff. It's absolutely fascinating looking at the parallels between the two.
Yeah.
So,
In fact, I should send you my manuscript. I got two books coming out. It was so long we turned it into two books, but it's exactly that story. Is when you start looking at all these different paranormal phenomena, they all have the same things happening in them, like 360 degrees. When somebody was inside the craft and they said, oh, I could see in 360 degrees, I go, hey, that's what the OBE people say. They can see in 360 degrees. And so we've written a whole book on this. I was going to call it crossovers. And I don't know what my editor is going to call it something different, but we're going to call it crossovers. Is this idea that even you get the spiritual stuff. I remember the most dramatic one I had was Ron Johnson, who's you want to might talk to him. He's very very sick, but he's had just had a couple near-death experiences, and he's had UFO experiences since the 1960s. He's recorded thousands of pages of his stuff. He's written a book which he hasn't published or whatever, but he had it, and he told me the story that the being, and there's this other weird thing is like when you get the beings, I always cross cross the path and I say, "You were dealing with aliens, you're on the ship." Yep. What was the name of the guy you were dealing with? And they always have a name. And nobody realizes that. There's only one person that talks to him. All the rest of the aliens don't talk to him. And then you start to wonder, is this a spirit guide or is this an alien or what's really going on here? And so his guy was named Elby. And in the end, the regression indicated that Elby was his son, that he had been abducted and Elby was his son. So that whether that's true or not, but Elby takes him to the spirit world three times. And the first time it's like Eben Alexander's, where it's sort of in the mud, he's not really getting anything. And the second one, he can hear his mother. His mother's dead, and he can hear his mother talking and stuff like that. And the third one, he's actually in the spirit world with his mother, and they're in this field, and he says, "This is real as real can be." And he's a Mormon guy. So he says, I'm looking, and there's this little temple. It's like like a Mormon temple. He names the city, this town in Utah that resembles it and stuff like that. And then he says, my mother says to me, she says, "Ron, when you die, you're going to get a room in this building. And your father's in the building. He has a room in there as well." And he says, just this little tiny church building. And he said suddenly the wall opens up and he can see his father inside this building. So she takes him inside the building and he walks in. He says, we walk in the building. He says, "Grant, the weird thing was, it was like 100 times the size inside as it was outside." And I go, "What? Are you in a UFO or are you in the spirit world here?" And so and there's a whole deal. And then they take him. The other parallel was she takes him down the hall. They got all these paintings and stuff. I won't get into the whole story, but so she takes him down the hall and there's this table and it has these crystals sticking out of the table. And then she says, "Ron, these are when you die, you're going to get a crystal in here, and it'll be there. And if you look at it at a certain angle, you can see your past lives, you can see all this kind of stuff like that." And then he's going, "That's kind of, but I don't have one yet." She says, "Well, no, you got to die, and then your crystal will come." And then he sees, "Oh, my dog's got a crystal." So he looks at because his dog disappeared in 1972. So he's looking at the crystal at an angle, and he sees that his neighbor at the end of the dog's life, the neighbor shot the dog and threw it in the junkyard. And then he says, "Now I know what happened to my dog." But he's telling this story, and then I'm thinking to myself, that's weird because I'm a big fan of Dr. Michael Newton, Journey of Souls, this whole thing about life between lives, where he takes 7,000 people, regresses them into their past life, lets them die, and then takes them into the spirit world. What's happening now? Going to the tunnel now, now, now. And he goes through. And everybody talks about, you sit in these libraries and you have these books, and the guy gives you a book and you open the book and there's this crystal in there, and you look at the crystal at a certain angle and you can see your past lives and you plan your future lives. And then if you remember the documentary UFO Cover Up Live, 1988. It was right at the end of the Reagan administration. We believe that Reagan had authorized leaks in this thing, and this is where they identified the live alien and the Condor and the Falcon. And the Falcon is like Richard Doty is playing the Falcon, and they claim the Falcon was some other guy who was just covering for him. But Richard Doty in this Falcon thing says the most amazing thing I saw my entire time was the aliens had a crystal, and they could actually show you the crucifixion of Jesus. They were showing it to the American government. It was the most amazing thing he saw. So you get parallel these crystals, and who's going to make up a story about a crystal? I mean, that doesn't make any sense until and it's exactly the same story. So I agree with you. This is when you start looking across, but that's what, if you interviewed Ray Hernandez, he had the experience where he had the contact, he could make contact, and he realized, and then he went on the internet and put consciousness and UFO, came up with my name. And I said to him, "Well, I'm coming to Florida. I'm going to give a lecture on consciousness. You can come down and we'll talk about your story and stuff like that. I'm giving a lecture on consciousness. Maybe it'll help you." So I go down to Florida, and 2 days after my lecture, he's driving down the Miami freeway and he's stuck in a road, just jammed up. There's nothing moving. And he said suddenly he's listening to NPR radio, and all of a sudden, boom, he's out of his body, and he's in this field, and they have this wheel that's spinning around. It has all these images like remote viewing, psychic phenomena, UFOs, mediumship, all this sort of stuff. And in the middle is consciousness. And whoever it was, the voice says to him, "Look at this. You've got to stop parsing this stuff. It's all the same thing. And that's where I've come to the conclusion. It's all the same thing. It's all, everything's made out of consciousness, and we're never going to figure out any of it. It's so far beyond that you can never really see reality. If you've studied Donald Hoffman, he always talks about this thing, space-time is doomed, and the fact that everything is an icon, that you're not actually driving a race car on your video game. There's always going to be something in between you and reality. You can't actually see it. We get closer and closer all the time to it. But I think that's what it is. We're never going to figure out any paranormal phenomenon. And you talk about mediumship. I mean, mediumship's been going on for 150, 175 years. They've never figured out anything. Same as ESP, remote viewing, any of this sort of stuff. We sort of know a little bit about it. And that's what I say about science, where science says, oh, we can explain this. And I say, science doesn't explain. This is one of the things that came in my download. Science doesn't explain anything. It just describes. All it's doing is describing, like Moses opening the Red Sea. Moses came down with his staff, he hit the Red Sea, the water, the wind came up, the water went up, the ground got dry, the children river went through, yada, yada, yada. He hit the thing and the water went back together and all the other guys were killed or whatever. And it's like, yeah, wonderful little story. Now tell me, how do you do the trick? It's one thing to describe the trick. It's another thing to do the trick. And that's what's going on here. We're just describing what UFOs are doing or what's happening with all of reality. And we really don't understand anything. And that's where, guys like Jim Semivan, when I say to people, listen carefully to what these guys like Jim Semivan, Lakatsky are saying. When Jim Semivan says there does not appear to be any there, what the heck is he talking about? There does not appear to be any there. This is this whole idea that it all just evaporates into nothing when you start going down into the subatomic particles and stuff like that, and you start to realize it's all like mind forms, and that God created us as fields, and we're part of God, or as a field out of the big field, and that we're creating everything out of consciousness, and that we're making the world more magnificent, more dramatic, adding things to it, and the world keeps getting more bigger and bigger and bigger and stuff like that, and that's what it's all is. This is a big play of God looking back at himself through various people. And this is what you start seeing the UFO in a different term, where when you start asking, one of the things I always said to people who had experiences, I said, hey, do you ever ask him if he's an alien? And there's two cases that I always bring up. And one was Sherry Wilde, who had this encounter, and she was terrified by it. She's never gotten over it. She's still very traumatized by her thing. So they wanted her to write this book, and it was called The Forgotten Promise. And she said, I'm not writing your damn book. And he said, well, no, timing is everything. We should do this book. And they finally bugged her, and she wrote the book. And then she took it to her publisher, and she was dealing with, her guy was named Da, and he was a gray. It was Zeta. So she goes to the publisher, and she gives him the book. And then he says, Sherry, something wrong here. You said he's from Andromeda. She said, yeah, that's what he said. Well, you said he's a Zeta, right? Yeah, he's a Zeta. Well, then he can't be from Andromeda. He's got to be from Zeta Reticuli if he's a Zeta. And he said, really? She didn't know. She went, really? So she says, well, I'll ask him next time he comes. So Doc comes. She says, okay, so what's going on here? Are you actually an alien? And to quote what he said, no, that would not best describe who I actually am. I am an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. And I remember there was two from Great Britain. If you ever dealt with the beings, the one woman channels them, the other woman can pick up what they're saying and stuff like that. She hasn't seen them, only one can see them. And they're these beings that call themselves Chan, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. They don't want to be known as anything. They're just these little black beings. They don't have any faces. They don't have any hands. And they just run around, these little black beings. And they're giving this material to this woman who's channeling them. So they said, oh, the beings want to talk to you. And I said, really? Oh, cool. Because I've had a couple of messages from beings that turned out to be books. So I said, oh, cool. I'll like to talk to them. So then, of course, what's the first question you ask? So, are you extraterrestrials? And then they go, would you like us to be extraterrestrials? We could do that if you want. Yeah, we could really do that if you want. We could even take you to our planet. But no, we're not extraterrestrials. We've always been here. You're the visitor. And then you get into this whole quantum idea that all the lives are on top of each other. There's no time and space. Everything's happening at the same time. And this whole idea that everything is here now. And that's what people told me on board the ship, which I remind people, this is extremely important because two people for sure told me this. And I didn't have a chance to go back and ask the others whether they were told this. But Ron Johnson, for example, who was one of the people who flew the ship, they said, Ron, where would you like to go? They'll take you for a trip. Where would you like to go? He said, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance, which would be like 70,000 light years. And they said, okay, Ron, it's within you. Go within yourself. When you can imagine it, then we'll go there. And the two other women were told exactly the same thing. The idea that it's within yourself. And then he said he told me he was ready, and then he said it was like 1 second of very intense G-force, and he said suddenly look out the window and there was the Milky Way off in the distance. Which is this whole idea that if you're remote viewing, I point out to people, it's the same idea. If you're remote viewing, is the Ingo Swann flying off to Jupiter to look at the rings of Jupiter? You give him the target 453709, and the guy he says, I'm at the target. He doesn't say, hang on, I'm flying there. I'll be there in a minute. It's like, no, it's instantaneously. And if you even near-death experience, one of the people you should maybe look at is a woman. I interviewed her on my YouTube channel. Her name was Ingrid Honkala. She was a PhD oceanographer for NASA. And she
Oh
talks
yeah.
about this experience where she's 3 years old, she dies, and she talks about this thing where she's out of her body, and then she looks at this dog, and she likes dogs. She goes, "Oh, a doggy!" And boom, she's at the dog instantaneously with the dog. And then she looks down the street, and she sees this tree. Boom, she's at the tree instantaneously. And then she thinks, oh, my mother. And suddenly she's over top of her mother. Her mother's running to the bus stop. And suddenly her mother goes, oh, oh, and she realizes something's wrong. And she goes running back and pulls this girl out of the swimming pool or this thing in the backyard. And that's this thing, this instantaneous movement around that when you're in that field, or it almost comes back to this thing that Stephen Greer always talks about when he does the protocols for the CE5. He says, you see yourself as a puny, a Sufi expression. You see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. And that's where the UFO starts to come down. It may be there's no out there. That's what Jim Simonvan says. There does not appear to be any there. It's this idea that it may be, we're totally missing it. There may be just one point in space. Everything's in that one point in space. There's no time and space inside there. And all we're doing is going through vibrations levels towards the highest vibration, which would be God, which would be non-vibrating. And it's like the Hindus say, when the vibration starts, the illusion starts. And it's this vibration when the illusion starts, and we're very slow vibrating, and that's physical. And as you higher vibrating, which the grays are higher vibrating, you get into these realms where they're taking you into this realm. And people will talk about the fact that the being was vibrating. I couldn't stand being by them and stuff like that. And this whole idea that it's different realms. So if you do ayahuasca, you go into a different realm. You do psychedelics, you go into a different realm. That there is like, endless numbers of realms, and it's all there. And there is no out there. We sort of make this assumption that there's time and space, but that's for 100 years. That's been gone, but still people haven't come to grips with that it may be all here now, and they're not coming from anywhere. They're here, and they're just coming from a different vibration. And that we're the ones that create the heavens and the earth. We're not created, and then the consciousness goes into the creation. Everything's conscious, everything's alive, everything's connected to the one, which is the main message you get from near-death experiencers and from UFO experiencers. And even the thing you mentioned, this thing like UFO experiencers, 40% of them, according to the survey, said that or 37% said that they had a near-death experience. And most of the ones I've talked to have had two near-death experiences, not one. And then the whole idea that 31% of near-death experiences say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. 40% of UFO experiencers say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And that happens in psychedelics. It happened to me, where suddenly at one point, you know the answer to everything and you can't bring it back. And so you get these crossovers where you see, as they told Ray Hernandez, it's all the same thing. You've got to quit parsing this stuff. It's all the same thing.
Amazing, amazing. Well, there's a quote of yours that you say if we manage to have this life where we get to have these sorts of conversations and investigate this, then we've won the Super Bowl. So I
Yeah,
really feel
yeah.
like I've won the Super Bowl getting to have this conversation tonight, man. It's been amazing.
Yeah, we should take an opportunity, because next time we may be, as I point out, the opposite is you're an untouchable in the streets of Calcutta and spend your days in a junkyard looking for something valuable enough to sell for food for tomorrow. We didn't get that. We got the Super Bowl, but next time we may be the person in the junkyard. So we should appreciate the fact that we got to play the big game once at least.
Absolutely. I'm hoping to come back as a golden retriever next time. I think they've got it. They've got life figured out. But
Yeah. Yeah, let's get together again if you want to do another podcast sometime, but I'll set up one with you, and I'll talk to you and maybe your mother, and we can go from there, because I like these craft ones, because I actually did during Mishlov. uh it's going to be March 1st. We talk about the craft, flying the
oh
craft.
wow,
So Mishlov is a big audience. So it's starting to get around now that people
yeah.
realize this is part of the component of, and you got guys like Hal Puthoff backing it up, and Eric Davis backing it up. So that's a major thing. And then these telepathy kids that have moved this whole ball from, just, evil aliens landing on stuff like that to this very complex mystery that you and I sort of partly understand already.
Yeah. It's that ultimate trickster element, how these kids that society's kind of gone, these kids are baggage,
Yeah,
we feel terrible for them, but they're useless to us. And all of a sudden, these kids are the key to, disclosure or whatever you want to
yeah.
call it. I,
I
I
actually
love that.
asked, I interviewed Diane Hennessy Powell, who discovered these kids. I said, did one of them actually say at one point, don't worry about us. We don't want to be cured. We're okay the way we are. We're here to help you. And she said, yeah, that happened. It's like, we're here to help you.
Yeah, there you go.
We don't need your help. You need our
Yeah,
help.
100%. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Grant.
Thanks,
Honestly, it's
Tom.
been brilliant. I look forward to
Namaste.
speaking to you soon.
Okay, talk to you.
Namaste. Cheers.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.